Hi, my name's Alex Popov and this is video number 5 of the motorcycle tank tutorials. In this video we'll pick up where we left off and start building the top surfaces for our tank. So the first thing you want to do is turn symmetry on for the layer that contains your surfaces. You can do this in the layers menu at the top of the screen. Next you want to edit point curve set to degree 3 and snap to the end positions of our surfaces. You can snap by holding Ctrl Alt and clicking and then dragging along the surface edge to the position you want to place the CV. So next thing we're going to do is place down some helper curves. We're going to use the key point curve toolbox, which can be found here in the palette. You click on that and the toolbox comes up. We want line perpendicular, which can be found here. And we're going to draw off some lines that are perpendicular to our surface edge. This will allow us to keep our top curves nice and perpendicular in their orientation to our side surfaces, which will in turn lead to good hull structure when we come to build the surfaces. And now we can start transforming our CVs using the transform CV control toolbox, and we can start shaping our curve to reflect the shape of our tanks. So we do need the canvas layer on. The canvas layer editor, you can just toggle between on and off, and now we can transform the CVs, turn them off so you can see what the line's doing. Now our curves are the correct height, we can go into front view and check they're the correct shape, maybe apply some more curvature towards the outer sides of the curves so that they have better lead in going into our side surfaces. To shape the curves, you're going to want to apply symmetry to the curve, so click it and then in the object edit section of the palette hit symmetry. That yellow dotted marker signifies the curve now has symmetry. Now with XYZ movement selected, I'll transform the CV, constrain the movement to the Y direction and apply the curvature comb. You can see we've got good even curvature and also good lead in towards the ends of our curve. Now I want to set the pivot to the end of the curve here, and then copy and paste it, and using Ctrl Alt snap to the surface, snap it to the end of that surface. With the stretch tool I'll stretch the curve into position. It's a good idea to use the stretch tool here because it keeps the relationship of those CVs along that curve proportional, even though you're changing the shape or the size of the curve, which is what you want for these top curves because it will keep their CV layouts in proportion to one another, and that will ultimately lead to more uniform and nicer hull structures when we build surfaces between the curves. Now using my helper curve and the canvas image behind, I can use the rotate function in the transform CV toolbox to rotate my hull perpendicular to the surface edge. There we go. And the canvas image will help us just scale transform CV in NUV direction and just pull those in a little bit. So there we go. You can see with the curvature combs, the curves are doing the same thing, and I'm just going to repeat the process on this end. So copy and paste the curve, stretch it into position. Then we can rotate the hull so that it's perpendicular to the surface. And I'll just go a little bit further so I can show you guys. And then transform CV, CV selection only, not hull selection, and then in the NUV direction we pull the CV in. So we can now apply the curvature continuity locator to these curves just to double check the curvature on them. And yeah, they're not too bad. That one could do with a little bit of a tweak. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the curves in exactly the same way. Now you can see the curves are done. They all have a strong relationship with one another in terms of their shape. We no longer need these locators or the helper curves, so we can delete those. And then our curves or our top surfaces are ready to be built. You'll notice that I've changed the degree of the curves to degree 5, as I showed you how to do before in the control panel. It's just easier to shape curves when there's less CVs, but now we need a bit more accuracy. So we're going to use the bi-rail tool to build our top surfaces. We're going to build from our curves and our side surface trim edges. You'll also notice that I've added a few extra curves just to help our surfaces out when we build them along the top. As I mentioned before, you don't really want to ask a surface to do too much work. So I'm going to whiz through and quickly square off all these surfaces. If you get any position failure notifications or little red arrows along the edge, don't worry too much about it, because we're actually going to cut away a lot of these surfaces where those edge boundaries are to build our blend surface between the top and sides. Now I'll just hide these surfaces so we only look at what we need to. We can apply a shader to assess the quality of our surfaces. And we've got some problems here. And a few other problems on the lower surfaces at the rear too. Just a few wobbles in our black and white lines there. At this point we can turn the controls on and assess our hull structures. Might give us an idea of where the problems and the wobbles in the reflections are coming, and immediately you can see there's a dip in that hull there, and there's big problems over this side here, which has a drastic knock-on effect to the surface below. So that's what's bad at the moment. We'll use the curvature evaluator shader to show us what's good. Here where you have the shader kind of conflicting in colours, it's just your surface normals are facing the wrong way, so you can use this tool here in the surface edit section to select them and make sure all the surfaces pointing outwards are blue, inwards yellow. And now we can turn the shader back on. That's quite a big problem. So we can turn the shader back on and see that the majority of our surfaces aren't too bad at all. Got some smooth transitions of colour, which will mean quite nice reflections moving over those surfaces, and the lead in towards the edges is good as well. So we just need a little bit of direct modelling to fix those problem surfaces, and then we're good to go. Starting with the biggest problem first, we need to align this lower surface to the smaller, tighter radius surface above, simply because the problem starts in that smaller surface. So if we fix the issues there, I'm hoping it will have a knock-on effect to the larger lower surface below. So here we go, align with G2 continuity, and everything's all over the place. But at the moment we're just doing things quite quickly and quite roughly, just to try and get an improvement in our hull structure and CV layout over the surfaces. So using the transform CV tool, you can see if I pull these CVs, it does have a positive effect on the surface below. And what we're trying to achieve is essentially a more uniform CV layout over the surface. We don't want any particular CV looking like it's an anomaly in terms of its position. And we want our hull spacing to be as even as possible, and our hulls to be straight or following the same sort of line with no kinks. And you'll see I'm going to put symmetry on this surface, which will kill the alignment history. And now we can start direct modelling this surface into something a little bit more acceptable. I'm going to quickly show you how to get surface continuity evaluators along your surface boundaries. So here, I want to set that to tangency. You can also show the comb if you want a little bit more detail around your surface boundaries and if there's any problems. But we don't really need it for now, I just want to show you how to find it. And now we can go ahead and start manipulating our CVs using the transform CV toolbox and start sliding these CVs into position. I'm just going to be quite quick with this, not too accurate. And you can see the surface boundaries, the CVs along those boundaries are moving inboard because I don't necessarily need to maintain positional continuity with my side surfaces. As I explained before, we'll be cutting away a portion of the surface along those edges anyway to create our blend. And now I'm just going to, in the NUV direction, pull these CVs closer to the surface. And in combination with slide, we'll get them slightly more planar with the rest of the hull, or slightly more in line with the rest of the hull. And again, just by eye, pulling this surface and these CVs so that they look a little bit neater. And you can see that's an improvement on where we were about half an hour ago. to regain G2 continuity over the surfaces, I'll just align them, the smaller surface above to the lower surface below that we've just sorted out, and I can pull these CVs and they'll have a direct effect on the corresponding CVs in the aligned surface. So my screen capture area won't allow me to show you, but if you go to the object display menu and hit Control, this box will come up, deselect the CV option, and when you've got your surface selected, you'll see the CVs disappear but the hull remains, which means you can select these CVs on the lower surface without selecting the ones on the top surface and move them, and you can see they're sorting out the hull structure quite nicely. And again, just keep pulling these into shape so we have a nice uniform CV layout. As also mentioned, you want your hulls to be perpendicular, or your CVs to be perpendicular to your surface, so I'm just using the rotate function in the transform CV tool to rotate my hulls so that they become more in line and more perpendicular to the surface. I can also delete the history for this upper surface and put the CVs back on and start transforming those CVs again so the hulls are perpendicular to the surface and they have a nice even spacing and everything's improving. Again, here I'm not happy with the CV layout, they're too bunched up at this end, so I'll slide them and then pull them in the NUV direction, always taking into account what our locators are telling us, whether we've got curvature or if we break curvature, and tweaking the CVs until we're happy with the layout. I'll also just align this top edge to this larger surface and hide the CVs on the aligned surface in the same way we did before. Then I can slide these CVs to get a nice smooth hull structure throughout the surfaces. There we go. So hide the controls on the surfaces and delete the locators, and the diagnostic shader shows that we've improved the surface quality. However, if you put the curvature evaluation on, you can see that that boundary there and the other two boundaries actually have some issues. So we're going to sort those out in the next video. Thanks very much for watching. See you in the next tutorial.